In this video, we're going to talk about what to do when you get a low coolant warning on your iDrive. On the B58, we have two separate cooling systems, one that runs off of this large tank and one that runs off of the smaller tank. The larger tank is the only one that actually has a level sensor. So when you get the low coolant warning on your iDrive, it's indicating that this tank needs to be topped off. Now this one goes to your engine and your turbo, so it's extremely critical that you have enough coolant in that system and that you're not losing any. So the first thing you want to do when you get that message is let the car cool down and then take the cap off and look inside. And you should see the minimum underneath the coolant and the maximum should be above the coolant. Usually when you come in here, it'll be completely empty, but if it is full like this and you're still getting the air, that's indicating that the sensor itself is bad. So what you'll need to do is actually swap out the tank so that way you can fix the issue. But pretty much everybody, when you check it, you're going to see that the actual cooling system is low. Now, topping off the system is very easy. What I do is I buy 2 gallons of distilled water and 1 gallon of coolant concentrate from BMW. All you have to do is pour out 1 of the gallons of distilled water and then pour out from 1 gallon into the other so that both are half full, and then top them off with the coolant. And at that point, you have 2 gallons of perfect BMW 50/50 mix ready to top off your system whenever you need to. So go ahead and top it off, put it up to the minimum line, and that'll get you back to where you need to be. Now, if you don't have coolant available, you can go ahead and just top it off a little bit with distilled water, but you don't want to add a whole bunch, especially if you're starting it in sub-freezing temps. You want to make sure you have as close to a 50/50 mix as possible to protect you from hitting the freezing point. Now, if you're trying to get 50/50 mix, but you just don't have BMW coolant on hand, you can go to like your local auto parts store and find coolant that will work. BMW legally can't force you to use their coolant. So if you look at the manual, you'll see the specifications that coolant you use needs to meet in order for it to be safe for your seals and your water pump and your hoses. So go to your local auto parts store, find one that meets that requirement. Typically, it'll be advertised as a Euro spec coolant, and that'll be one that you can use. It's just kind of a hassle though. It's easier just to get some BMW coolant because when you take it to the dealer and try to get some warranty work, if they take off the cap and see that it's not blue and it's green or some other color, it can just be a hassle trying to get warranty work done. So I always recommend just getting the BMW coolant. It's about 25 bucks, nothing crazy, and it'll make it a lot simpler. Now that you've topped off your coolant, it's time to figure out where it's going. A lot of times BMW will say that it's normal or typical for their engines to consume some coolant, but that absolutely should not be the case. If you have everything sealed up properly, it will allow the system to build pressure, which improves the properties of the cooling system. So anytime that you're losing coolant, that means that you're losing pressure, which means it's not operating as efficient as possible. So I would highly recommend trying to diagnose this issue. If they won't do it, you can go to an independent shop, or you can buy the tools to do it at home. The first thing is just making sure that you don't see any obvious signs of leaks. So look around on your belly pan, look underneath the car in the bumpers to see if there are any signs of leaks. A very common cause for leaks from this system is having your radiators punctured. So what you'll do is come down and look inside your grill, and on the side grills you'll see if there are any punctures or signs of moisture on the bottom of the bumper. And that'll tell you if you're potentially losing coolant from one of those auxiliary coolers on the side. Another potential cause is from the turbo itself. There have been a couple people that have had their turbos replaced because it was leaking past the bearings and then basically being consumed by the turbo while it was under load. A good idea or indication if that's the cause will be smelling coolant in the exhaust, and that'll tell you that it's actually being burned up inside the turbo and coming out of the exhaust. That can also be a sign of like a damaged head gasket or a lot of other things that could cause the coolant to leak. But the easiest thing is just to check for hoses and look for any obvious signs. If you don't see any obvious signs of leaks, then the next thing to do is a pressure test. So to pressure test the system, you'll use a tool like this one. And this is what it looks like. It actually has a pressure gauge on it. And what you'll do is find the adapter for your car. This is actually for a different one, but it screws in the place of your cap. So you remove that, put this on the cap, and then this will plug into the adapter, and you actually pump it up just like a bicycle pump. And you're going to build up pressure to simulate the conditions that happen when the cooling system builds up pressure. And sometimes there are small cracks or, punctures in hoses that only leak when it's under pressure. And so what this does will help expose if that scenario is happening. So after you build up pressure, you can watch the dial, see if it holds steady. If it starts dropping, then you know to look around and see if there's a leak somewhere, because that indicates you're losing pressure and the coolant should be squirting out of your radiator or a hose or somewhere. Now, if this test passes and you don't have any coolant loss, any pressure loss, then I highly suspect it's your coolant cap. And that was the case in my car. When I actually removed the cap the first time, it was completely crusted on, and there was dried up coolant all around the threads of the reservoir. And so that indicated to me that coolant was evaporating past the cap because it didn't have a good seal. So I bought a new cap, replaced that, and put it on the car, and I haven't had any coolant loss ever since. So just go through those steps, figure out where your coolant loss is coming from. Do not accept it as just something that's normal. You can keep an eye on it if you want, just to see how bad it is, but it's only going to get worse. If you're losing coolant over time, the leak will get worse and worse and worse, and you don't want to get stranded somewhere with no coolant in your system, especially because this tank seems to not be very sensitive, and by the time it tells you that there's low coolant on the iDrive, it's like completely dry. So keep an eye on it, make sure your coolant levels are up, keep some coolant on hand in case you need it, and that should fix your issue. So hopefully this answers your questions. If you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below. Thanks.